Hello, welcome back to the What Problem Are You Solving podcast, the greatest podcast this Monday. It's great to see you all again, Ty, Adam, and special guest, Pete. We'll hear a little bit more about him and his background, but the usual prompt, icebreaker, thought pondering question starts off with, hey, Adam, what problem are you solving this week?
Trying to get I'm trying to figure out if I should really commit to Replit, Lovable, or well, those two. And then on Replit, trying to get something to see? You don't know? Ty,
I
tell
learned
him what
something
it is.
new today.
Tell him. So these AI, we dance around AI a lot on this show. Um, these sort of tell it what you want it to do semantically, coding apps work now. It's
That's
pretty
cool.
wild.
Mhm.
I saw something Ty sent around. Like I had done some of the bots and GPT stuff, and those are fine, but they were still hidden, and you didn't have access to the database. Um, yeah, these things work.
Wow.
It's wild.
Well, you're giving me a new toy to play with.
Oh
It's
boy.
wild.
Replit.
Um, so I was loyal to Lovable, still early days, but yeah, Lovable and Replit seem to be the two. Um, Someone said Replit has a last mile problem, which I am now also discovering. But this is like advanced stuff where it's plugging back into OpenAI for customer discovery analysis, of course.
Oh, cool.
Um, and so, yeah, that's my plug, my update, and also the problem I'm solving is trying to get it to bundle. It
All in
goes
one.
through yeah, lovable is deploys easily, but I think it's masked that it's not really working. Replit is on the development servers. It's actually, you could upload an interview, it reads the interview, it gives you a score, it tells you where you can improve,
Nice.
it unlocks level, but I can't get it to actually bundle. So if anyone knows how to do that or has connections at Replit,
Nice. AI
let me
for
know.
interviews. Got it.
But
That's a
for analyze, a lot of them
right.
are flipping it around,
Yes. No,
and
for actual.
I firmly believe that for this year, what problem I am solving is the analysis on technique and not in sort of synthetic interview.
You're not replacing forms or surveys with AI. You're actually taking good interviews and letting the AI help with analysis.
Or bad interviews that
Or bad
can,
interviews.
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Improve. Interesting.
How about
I
you,
just had a
Ty?
conversation. I'll get to it. I just had a conversation with our guest, the young man that we did last week, and he's trying to figure out what that looks like. And interestingly enough, I'd love to jive with you on Adam about this because the gentleman from Calgary, that the orange shirt guy that I thought was really interesting. He's talking about bifurcated questions. I built a chat bot to help design and think through bifurcated questions because what I found really interesting is in those bifurcations, right? Q sort kinds of things, you can get very good data in this funneled way about what problem you're trying to solve, what the customer's pain points are very quickly by is it this or this? Oh, it's that. Okay, so here's the decision tree or here's the question tree. So I need to figure out how to build a bot. I'm with you on that. I'm like, how do you build an automated process that helps you kind of think through what this might look like? So you have this question tree. It goes from here to here and then here. So as far as problems I'm solving,
And on that note, just quick,
go
Pete, we
ahead, go
don't
ahead,
normally
buddy.
go this long. We're building up Pete for, but the original bot on that, the five whys as a bot is just, it doesn't have to be artificial. It's just the dumbest bot ever. It just
I love
is
it.
stuck
It's the
on,
5Y bot.
it's just stuck
Shall never
in
get
a
to
loop.
4.
This
Shall
thing's
not
stuck on
to
a loop.
We'll
Nope.
never get to 6.
This,
I love it. I love it. I'm actually going to write that down. The five why, but I think there's something to that. But anyway, your question about what am I problem I'm working on? I'm getting, those that have listened to the show know that I've been okay. So what's my next gig? How do I get off of the How do I get off the bench and stop pinch hitting and actually get into the game full start? And so I'm getting close. I have a really cool interview coming up on Wednesday, and if it works right, it could really change a lot for me and my family. So that's what I'm working on. Yep,
Nice,
that's it.
nice. As for me, let's see. Actually, mine's kind of a fun one. Well, there's two of them. One, I finally this past weekend got my local LLM with RAG installed, so now I can actually query my own data offline into an LLM. So now I'm just fine tuning that. So that's a fun, nerdy one just to stay ahead of the game.
Such a nerd. Oh
I
my
love it,
God.
every minute of it.
Such a
Hey, you guys
nerd.
started with the AI talk. You just got me started. But the professional one, I actually been doing another fun one where from a I was asked to go speak tomorrow at an office offsite where I use agile methodology to help people with their New Year's resolutions.
Hey, is this the Agile Coffee? It sounds like Agile Coffee.
It's not an agile coffee, but it's close. How to use like some
Oh,
agile techniques to take your big goals and break them down to small pieces and
oh,
execute them
lovely.
in small sprints.
Awesome.
Pete, give us a short bio of who you are and help us answer the question, what problem are you solving this week? Make sure you unmute your mic there first.
There you
There you
go.
go. Yeah, so I'm retired. So
I don't have any
been
problem.
been
Screw
been
that.
retired for almost 3 years now. I had spent the last 37 years in the DoD, flitting around the intelligence community, and focusing probably the last 2/3 of my career on innovation specifically.
Awesome.
The first third of the career, I had a job that was so engaging. It was like playing a game, and
Nice.
so I had such a good experience with that. I overstayed my welcome. I spent 10 years doing that. And I thought, this is so well done. And this was like even before the internet. So like back in the punch card days. I said, this is such good marrying of technology to the task that I wonder why we don't do this for everybody. My task was relatively narrow. And then I ended up going into the research group where I had more flexibility to say, hey, we really need to improve our user experience. And that was kind of a novel thing, but I ended up getting connected with some of the best designers. And that was like a whole story of bureaucratic navigation that, you asked me what problem I'm solving. And over that time, I said, I got to write a book. And so now
I
I'm
feel
doing
you.
it. I'm writing a book. And a lot of it is about, what do you believe? And it goes back to things that you learn in user-centered design, like what do you believe? What do people actually need? And how do you come to grips with that? And that bureaucratic journey was, um, it had a lot of ups and downs. It was somewhat of an odyssey, I guess. So the problem that I'm working on in the immediate future is just to sort of get a handle on how to structure this book. Um, if you consider the universe of what you believe, from basic science laws of physics that you are convinced of, to things that you never believe were true, how do you break that up and come to grips with a perspective? And one of the real interesting things from, I guess, for this forum is when I talk to some of the best designers, their mindset is, we'll tackle anything. We'll solve the problem, and we have a process that we can go through, and we'll, whether or not we can knock it out of the park, we can make it better. We're sure we can make it better. And so that's part of that mindset of, what do you believe in?
Love it. That's awesome. That's amazing. So cool. All right. Well, if that's not challenging enough, let's talk about how to iterate for mission success. So again, we have a lot of experience here both in the commercial side as well as in the DoD and the IC and other not-for-profit organizations, right? Nonprofits, governments, things that don't have a profit incentive necessarily, but still need to cut through bureaucracy, cut through the red tape, cut through, the culture, as it were, in order to drive innovation. And so I think that's, again, where your experience, Pete, could really be shed some light on some lessons learned that you found throughout your career and anything else that you want to share in that vein. So, so you said you spent most of your time doing innovation in that world. Let me just ask a nice, good leading question, which is, where did you find nuggets of inspiration in the culture to keep you there, to continue to push the envelope doing innovation?
I guess one of the big moments was after 9/11, a number of people wanted to come help. And one of those guys came from Disney. He had been the executive vice president of research and development at Imagineering. And so he joined our effort. And the Disney experience was transformative in many respects. He came in and saw what was going on and said, hey, we can do better. It's like the mindset of what's the next greatest thing we can put in the park, right? What's the next great thing? What's the next great tool we can put in front of analysts to enhance their ability to do their job? And he was really great, and he gave me the opportunity to connect with these world-class designers. Unfortunately, he didn't stick around very long because organizational dynamics in the community. There was an opening at the ODNI, and he saw that as a better opportunity. But because I managed to get that start, I was able to navigate, push some buttons to get things to happen. And so I ended up doing a number of design thinking projects, some pretty phenomenal ones. Like one of the things that we found really useful, or that this was something that they did as a matter of course for us, it was like, who would ever do that? They have something they call analogous observations. You may be familiar with it. It's like, what can we, so we'll talk to the users, but what can we learn from other places that are sort of in endeavors that are analogous? So we ended up going to meet with the front office staff of the New York Giants. I was like, well, how do you guys use Intel? And of course, it was New York Giants. It wasn't the New England Patriots. Okay, that would be a different story. How do you use Intel? So one of the main things they did was that, they talked to us about how they go about recruiting their athletes from across thousands of possible candidates. How do they get to the ones they really want? And they told us a number of different things. We also talked to a CNN producer who had covered the 9/11 events live. And so we ended up talking to a number of different things. We ended up going on an exercise with the Navy SEALs during a night vision, what they refer to as I'm not sure if this is the right word, an elevation, something like that. Night vision exercise. They gave us the night vision goggles, let us listen into their comms and everything, so see what's going on. So we were able to learn a lot of valuable perspectives from things that weren't necessarily even related to what we were doing, as well as talking to the people that were going to use whatever it was. One thing that was particularly valuable, you talk about iterating. One of the things that I'm still fascinated with is artifacts. Being able to generate just little things, like these are cards. There are about 20 of these for giving things, contributing things, and then what you'd like to see as a reward. And so you got these from interviewing people, but then you sort of put them in the tangible form. Say, okay, now which ones are really important to you? So you'd say, well, I really want to have a great parking space, or I'd like to have lunch with the director, right? And you put these in front of people, and pretty soon, when you sort of force them to decide, it's like nobody really wants to have lunch with the director. What they really want is to have access to their peers who have information they want, right?
Ah, nice.
And so that's one way of iterating is with these artifacts.
Mhm.
And not only are they useful in dealing with users, but they're also useful in engaging leadership. And have some good stories to tell you about those. But my experiences with design thinking were very powerful. We delivered some really good stuff despite a lot of adverse bureaucracy. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious, Pete, about this idea of bureaucracy. In the commercial sector, it comes down to money, right? How much money can I get return on the investment that I put out? You got a 6 month runway, whatever you can produce in 6 months. I'll continue. If it sucks, then we're out of here. But I used to joke when I was working inside the fence, as it were, that every October 1st, nearly every organization inside the United States government becomes a unicorn. Why? Because they spend all their money down through September 30th,
Becomes $1 billion
October 1st,
company. Yep.
boom, it becomes $1 million company. And so the bureaucracy that's usually associated with the commercial sector and the drivers to make sure that they're successful, whatever that might look like, are very different than the bureaucratic drivers. I'm curious about how did you manage that as you went down and said, we're going to help you do your job better. Heck, I used to work at the location we used to work, and there was an opportunity on a contract to actually help upscale opportunities. And when the company went back inside the fence and said, "Hey, we're here to help," they're like, "No, you're going to mess up my mission. I'm going to actually give you things that work better, and I'm messing up your mission." I'm confused. Do you want to work better, or you just want to stay the same? So there's kind of real bureaucracy, paperwork and policy. And then there's cultural bureaucracy. It's like that's not how we do things around here. What don't you understand about that? How did you utilize design thinking to, for instance, to manage those? Like the real John and I used to call it red rules and blue rules, and then there's purple rules. What John, red is
Red's
things are
like
going to jail.
safety and law. Like you can get hurt or get arrested. Those are the ones you can't touch. And then there's the blue rules, which are the ones that are just kind of policies, procedures, something written down 20 years ago that everyone follows but don't know why. And then purple are those blue rules that people think are red rules that they treat them like law, although some human wrote it a long time ago.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, how did you manage that? That's pretty interesting.
I don't have a great answer on that because I was one of the poorest practitioners of bureaucratic navigation. But I guess I managed to sneak by sometimes.
Hey, that's an answer. Yeah.
I mentioned, in our previous exchanges that one of the things I ended up doing, I ended up detailed to a different organization at the ODNI, and I ended up running a contract using a DoD contract funded by a foreign partner. And it was just serendipity, trying to push all the buttons to make it happen. And the reason I had to do that was because I had kind of lost the top leadership advocacy, which I think is, if an organization is serious about innovation, you need to get commitment from the very top, in my opinion. You can make things happen like I did, like making that up as you go, but
under the radar, right?
It's like dropping the ball in the end zone when you needed the 2 points, just. But yeah, so how to navigate.
Poor Raiders fans. Poor Raiders fans.
One thing I could say is I really admired Carmen Medina. She's a former CIA.
A wonderful person.
You know her? So she wrote a book, Rebels at Work. She had, I guess, the best, because she was a senior, which, if you're a senior, it makes all the difference to what you're able to push around bureaucratically. But she had, I guess, a lot of good philosophy about getting allies who are good at that. Like I was lousy at it. If I had been able to find some some folks who were better at it. There's a paradox there, though, because, oh, great. Yeah, there it is. There's a paradox there that if your mindset is really about innovation, it becomes very hard for you to navigate the bureaucracy. You have to have a dual personality to be
Yeah.
that person.
You don't want to turn into us versus them, for sure,
Well,
right?
you got if you've made it and you're in a position of authority, the reason you've made it is not by being innovative. So it's yeah, I don't have great answers for that. What I would say, and this is sort of the story I was going to tell uh, about artifacts. Sometimes the scale of an artifact can be really important. So these designers we worked with ended up, they were big fans. I don't know if you guys use the 4x8 foam core panels. They're just lightweight boards that you can put stickies on and stuff. And they generated posters that had like several provocative themes and questions for analysts. And we had put these up in this innovation center that was specially built by this agency to host innovative activities. And we were like the most innovative ones. And our director, actually, this was his baby, the innovation center. So he came walking through, saw these displays, and he got sucked into this. And he was like looking at what people were responding to, and he spent like 5 minutes there. And then he left. And then 10 minutes later, he came back with his deputy, and both of them were looking through this stuff, right? So there is power, and you can get advocacy if you can show people something tangible for them to react to. So it was so good that the timing was such, it was like 2008, and the presidential transition teams were coming through, and they said, well, we got to show this to the presidential transition team. So there they were, all engaged in this good stuff. So that was one aspect of gaining the advocacy. And if it had sustained, we'd have been better off. It was one of those things where the right person stepped in front, or the wrong person stepped in front and said, I'm going to do the briefing. I'm not going to let them do the briefing. I'm going to do the briefing. And that kind of killed it, because you lose your voice and the narrative goes awry. So, but the big thing for me was, yes, having some tangible posters that show people provocative stuff that they want to engage with is very powerful stuff. And people would say, well, you could have done that with a PowerPoint. And I say, no. Having it up there, you can see it all, and you can be drawn into what you want to be drawn into, as opposed to flipping through, oh yeah, go back 3 slides, or was it 4 slides, So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that comes from that. And I think it's powerful if in the hands of people who know what they're doing,
How did you manage the provocative? Because the thing that I heard you say is advocacy to stay, my words, not yours, but I think it captures advocacy to sustain commitment. So you had the director come down, he's looking at it. Hey, I'll be right back. Didn't say this. Brings back his deputy. They spend more time with it. So there was an advocacy. But I think that John and I's experience, and I think Adam as well, is that the provocative, which is pushing people to consider things they had not considered before, I think is absolutely important, because we're creatures of habit. And it isn't until we're pushed to outside our comfort in terms of, let's say, design thinking, that I would have never considered that. How did you manage in mission space, where it is in bureaucracy is this idea of sustain what we're doing? We don't like innovation. We like to sustain because we have a set pattern of workflow to be able to do that. How did you get them to even consider the provocative, to do this kind of work? Because that was one of the things that John and I always struggled with. How do we get people to be provocative? Adam in his work helping people, asking the provocative question. I'm just curious about how you did it in your experience, getting people to respond to that.
Well, I think it came from the users themselves and questions that they didn't have good answers for.
Hmm.
I'm struggling to recall the themes and so forth. Like maybe an example, you've probably heard this over time, especially when people are trying to say we ought to run like a business, to say, well, how much is a pound of intelligence worth? And
John, we
so
have heard,
that would
we have
that
heard
would be
that before, right?
that
Never
would
heard
be
that
one of
before.
those. That would be one of those questions, like, well, how do you value it, right? What makes it valuable? And so you could poke around. It's not the 5 whys, but in some respects, you're kind of in the 5 why space. You're trying to explore what's underneath, and I think generally people's curiosity is drawn in by that stuff.
Yes.
Adam, you had an interesting response to something Pete said.
Yes. So, well, all right. So the direct question is, why is innovation so fragile? You talked about antibodies and corporate antibodies and government antibodies. So I think
Well,
that might
I think a
that
lot
might
of
just
times,
be the
I think a lot of times just comes down to ego.
Ooh, say
In
more
many
about that. What do you
cases,
mean? Whose ego?
so I had this theory that no matter what innovation you were going to bring into an organization, there was going to be some person whose turf was going to be threatened by it.
Ha.
And in a couple cases, we had a guy who perceived that he was the innovation guru uh, for his enterprise. And another point I would make is that he had a lot of ideas, and if people think they have a lot of ideas, that's the end of the story. And it's like, no. I remember I had a high school football coach, and his mantra was execution, execution, execution. And he had 7 kids by the time he was 35, so he lived it.
Wait a minute, Pete. John, how many children do you have?
It's a little close to home. Not quite 7, but have a full
I'm from a
scrum
family
team.
of I'm from a family of 7, but it was a timeline, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, an idea is not worth anything unless you execute it and execute it well, right?
Yeah.
So that's what these guys didn't understand. There's also this mindset of, hey, we know how to solve this problem. We're going to put a user with a programmer and magic will happen. And maybe if you had the right programmer and you had the right user, it could happen, but it'd be serendipity. What you were missing was the designer. You needed somebody who was going to interpret what the user wanted and actually put it in a form that the programmer could implement. And that was the missing
Well,
ingredient
Pete,
there.
engineers have been building stuff for years by taking user requirements. Why do you need a designer? What's so special about designers and design thinking? Aren't they a middleman? Do they kind of get in the way?
That's the mindset. And in fact, another thing you run up against is the idea that, and I was in a very tense meeting with the director, his subordinate, uh, the guy whose turf was being threatened, and one of the other technical guys came in and said, "Well, this is all fine, but it's all fluff. It's all look and feel. We have stuff that does all this. It's just the look and feel." And I had to raise my hand, as the junior guy coming out of nowhere, and say, what the user interface does is it determines what somebody can do. It's what allows them to do or not do and how they can do it. So it's not fluff. It's the rubber meeting the road.
Let me give you a perfect example of that. So early on in my civilian life, I saw a blog post written by a partner, and he showed with screenshots the 40 steps that it took to send some files between agencies. 40 steps. But technically, you could do it. Like the engineers would say, It satisfied the requirement. It did the function that it was asked to do,
And not only that, I mean, we had
but
one.
horribly.
We had designed we had these guys design a suite of 7 modules that were interactive. They were designed to operate together to do different aspects of the task. And one of the guys said, "Well, this module here is basically just this capability we already have." And I remember having sat down with that capability, and to even start using it, the user had to select specific fields from the database that weren't even labeled in
Ugh.
everyday terms. They were labeled in database
So if
terminology.
you know this esoteric knowledge and or
And like,
configure it the certain way, then you get.
it's like, yeah, we already have this capability. No, you don't. You think you do, right? So yeah, I mean, you guys have been there, done that.
So how did you get them? Because I know we're about 30 minutes in, and part of the conversation that attracted me to having that I wanted to have this conversation with you is that there is this balancing act between design thinking, what we call the mission model canvas or the business model canvas, and or lean startup. And of the three of us, the one who actually introduced this whole thing was Adam, because he was actually with the old school Eric Reese, faculty lean startup, and I'm curious about. So, for instance, I love the fact that we have the user and the programmer, but no designer, nobody interpret this, and you're saying that yes, you can have all of the engineering that you want, but if the user can't use it, it's useless. User
Bingo.
means useless if they can't use it. And so I'm curious about that, but I also want to begin to kind of move to this idea of what you've talked about in terms of lean startup, because I'm really curious about it and your experience with it, and then we can kind of figure that out. But first, this idea of uh, uh, of of how do you crack that? How did you get to there?
So when we started looking at lean startup, bureaucratically, there are things that are appealing about lean startup, or in this case, ICOR, because ICOR was a training mechanism created by the National Science Foundation. And their motivation for doing that is to take ideas and make them commercially viable. And so for that purpose, the lean startup approach is ideal. You already have a capability. Now you're trying to figure out how to commercialize it. So from that perspective, it makes great sense. When we started an innovation office, we knew that there were efforts going on. I advocated for design thinking because I'd already done a few projects that were successful. There were other folks who were doing the ICOR thing, and then there was already a legacy Lean Six Sigma, which is yet another
Right.
innovation approach. And there were other
Mhm.
folks doing Agile and other things. And what we thought was, hey, let's let let those approaches gravitate to the areas where they make sense. So design thinking is definitely focused on user experience. Lean Six Sigma, if you have a process, optimize the process. If you're doing lean startup, the best fit that we saw for that was, there's one of the few things that you could count on an organization in the government doing for innovation. It was going to be, we'll just stand up an organization, right? Well, if that was going to be your thing, lean startup makes all kinds of sense, because now you're trying to figure out, okay, what is this organization, this startup, what is this going to do? It's going to deliver what, to whom, how, based on what? You start that made sense to me. Or in some cases, if you did have a technology and you didn't know what to do with it, then maybe trying to figure out product market fit and all that, maybe that made sense. But organizationally, what ended up happening was, and this is probably true of just about any innovation attempt in the government, especially, you're going to claim success. Hey, we tried it. Hey, we succeeded. Lean Six Sigma. Can't tell you how many awards were given out for Lean Six Sigma, and the end result was the organization did what they were going to do regardless. So I mean, that is a very negative thing about innovation in government is nobody wants to admit failure.
Yeah, it
So
seems to be, as you say that, because you and I both have seen many examples of innovation offices that never seem to get what we call in the outside world traction, right? That great, awesome projects, super motivated people, like sometimes packed with a dream team, and yet that the larger corporate antibodies never quite absorbed them. It never became, like I said, it was always an us versus them. It never became a we. And I'm just wondering if that is the nonprofit or government or bureaucratic example of crossing the chasm, right?
well,
Because you don't have early adopters per se for mission tools. Sometimes you do, but as far as the status quo, right? Those are your late majority and your laggards that you're trying to transform, and it's very, very hard to do from the inside. Would you agree?
yeah, I would definitely agree. I had a better response to that, and it's eluded me now. But it may come back.
All right, Adam, what else have you got on your mind?
I mean, far be it for me to be the boring one that wants to restructure everything. Like, so you talked about the right tool for the right job. And so to me, it's like, I kind of want to go back through that in a methodical way. It's like lean startup is like, what is lean startup? What is design thinking? What is Lean Six Sigma? And then what problems are they trying to solve? And then why are, I don't know if we have 7 minutes left, if we have 22 minutes left, but like, to me, I think that's the piece of Ty's question that I want to pick up on, because I agree. It's kind of fun to talk about, you know, lean versus agile, lean versus human-centered design. And I remember 15 years ago, this question, I was like, all right, design thinking is for the problem, lean startup is for the product, and agile is for scale, or do they all fit within each other? Let's define what, at least those three, maybe agile there also to give it context. And then yeah, what they are, and then why, and then their ideal use case, and then maybe why they're good at that thing, what problem they're solving, what is the job to be done of that framework over a different framework for that context. I think that'll at least eat up 22 minutes. But I think there's other
Well,
stories we want to get out of you too. But
sure.
that's
One of the things I wanted to say earlier when I lost my thread was um, lean. And going back to defining what lean startup is, to me, the business model canvas captures lean startup perfectly. It represents every aspect of an organization that is created to do something, and in a business model canvas sense, that thing is to make money. Um, when you try to translate that to the government and try to make it a mission model canvas, I think, and I tried very hard to get this to work in my mind, but you lose a sense of, okay, who's paying for what and who's getting what, and we had this term, maybe you guys are familiar with it, called the economic buyer.
Right.
It's like, okay, who is who here? And I really would get lost in that. But I would say still, the lean startup is it, it represents an organization. It's a startup. Now you can pick different pieces apart and say, well, there's a value proposition canvas, and we're only going to focus on the user and what we're giving to the user. That's kind of good. One of the things I didn't like about that was in this concept, you're looking for a minimum viable product, and and so often the case was we already had a minimum viable product. It sucked, you know. The goal was to try to make it better. So um, that's where the design thinking came in, where now you're focused exclusively on the user. What does the user need out of this? Everything else, especially in a government sense, organizationally, if you figure out the user experience, other things are going to fall into place. The funding will be there, uh, the organization will be there, but the first thing you got to solve is that user experience problem.
Right.
Um, yeah, I don't know if that probably did a poor job of getting to the definitions, but I think
Well,
you guys have said this before, but user-centered design is basically problem solving, right? It's what problem you're trying to solve. I think it has its roots back in Stanford University. Creative problem solving was the term that they started with, and that's sort of the essence of it. Is, hey, we have a problem, we need to solve the problem. The problem very often is user experience. Whereas the lean startup is a startup. It's an organization. You can pick it apart. But if the rest of the organization's already there, you don't get much value out of this approach to it. I don't think. And the Lean Six Sigma is basically just you have a process in place, and the process is not what you want it to be. So you're going to tweak that process, and sometimes you get to user issues. Other times, and there are tools that are associated with optimizing process, but a lot of it's not necessarily focused on the user. Some of it's focused on mechanics, supply chain, other stuff. So I guess at least in those three things, it seemed clear enough in my mind what was good for what.
You it was trying to formulate my thought, because there was a piece around the uh, the lean startup and the design thinking that I'm curious about. And it really does come down to, for me, the difference between a corporate environment and a mission environment. Because that's the part that John and I had always struggled with, is how do we convert this language from what these folks are building, trying to do warfighter support or decision maker support or whatever it might be, so we can get them out to doing something. Because we actually had an opportunity to work in very high parts of the government, and consult with folks that were trying to build not products necessarily, but trying to go against some strategy, right? Trying to build out and augment their organizational design to go against the strategy or whatever the director said. I need to make this happen. And I think there were times where we weren't exactly sure what there was like three of us sat on a team. John was the engineer. I'm the big headed thinker. And we had a guy who was like a former Marine, who spent time, in some very dangerous places, but he was like one of the most creative cats I've ever met in my life. Right. And so it seemed to me that was almost mirrored, interestingly enough, almost mirrored that design, that three team that you had talked about, that you had to have the programmer, you had to have the user, and you had to have the designer in between. And at times I was the almost the user, like, I don't know what you guys are doing. And John would like, okay, let's figure this out, because he is a certified safe agilist, blah, blah, blah. I told you the other guy was a former Marine who was super creative. How did you pull together your team? And I'd be curious about that, because how did you pull together your team to make this happen? Did you go out and you went and had these collaborative relationships with other parts of the agencies that you were working in, to pull them in to say, I need to have a multifaceted, multi-experienced, multi-skilled team to come together to make this thing that we're trying to do happen? Because I know that you had said earlier, at least in our correspondence, that, for instance, IDEO was where you learned some of this stuff in Stanford. So I'm just curious about, how did you pull all those pieces together?
Yeah. So I have to admit that the only reason for having any success at all was to hire IDEO. Um,
Hmm.
I had no ability. They actually had the bureaucratic skills that I lacked. So in hiring them, I brought them in, and my attitude was, these guys know what they're doing and I don't. And I'm going to let them do what they think they should do. And a lot of that had to do with, hey, Pete, we really need to talk to somebody in leadership. Can you get us And so I would be doing what they would tell me they needed to have done. And they were very, very good at that. And it's I'd say it's no magic. They do it. That's what that's their game. They practice that. They do it all the time. Whereas for me as a bureaucrat, it's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to get, I don't know. Or like, for example, I talked about the analogous observations. How did we get to go talk to the New York Giants? They had connections, right? How did we get to go CNN? They had connections. So for me to do that and operating internally independently as a design thinker, I was unable to achieve the success that they could achieve. And some of that goes back to these artifacts. Like, what can you create that's going to engage people and it's going to dig deep, right? You're not just looking for superficial stuff. You're going to dig deep here to understand what people's true priorities are, what they're not just going to tell you automatically. You need to put stuff in front of them and say, you really think this is more important than that? Show me, and they'll do it and they'll love it.
So let's talk about success for like how is it defined? I think it's very interesting. I'm glad you brought it up again. I was sitting on it. Like the analogous, what are you calling it? Analogous observation?
Analogous observations, right?
Because it's so interesting because it's like we push people to talk to the right people, and obviously you can gain insights from an analogous observation that you wouldn't normally see, but you have to also then know how to analyze it and apply it correctly so that you're then solving the original problem for the right person. Otherwise, you're getting a false positive. You're like, oh, I talked to these other people at the Giants. The Giants have this problem analyzing data, therefore these analysts inside have the same problem, and then you can feel like it's a thin line between finding some key hidden insight and totally
Yeah, I think
misunderstanding the problem. So maybe tie all that. So the objective, the learning objective, the definition of success. Even this even goes back to my question about the innovation center. Like who asked? When you said it got shut down or it wasn't quite as successful. Like who asked for it to be there? Why was it there? What was the point of it? What was the runway for it? How is it being evaluated? So yeah, I'll use a lot of my talking points on that.
Yeah, that goes pretty deep. And I don't know if I can come up with great answers to some of it. I mean, the guy who created the innovation center was the director. The new director came in and said, I want an innovation center because in a past life he'd had one. He called it something else, designed by Disney, or a guy who used to work for Disney. But he wanted that. Now, did he have any clear idea, objective for it? No, he just wanted people to innovate. And it's also a mindset that's typical of leadership is to say, well, we'll just create something and magic will happen, right? People will figure it out. I remember I was actually put on a Tiger team to solve a certain problem. And this was the guy who could come from Disney. He said, I'm just going to create this Tiger team and magic will happen. And it didn't, because the mindsets weren't there to try to get people to create stuff, to create the artifacts. Let's try something. Let's do something. No, let's analyze more. Let's do what we always do. How do you break from that? And so the Innovation Center was an attempt to do that without any real idea of, hey, maybe we'll just create one and magic will happen. Whereas, from my perspective, I felt very strongly because I'd seen a lot of these failures. I was part of this one failure that, again, we claimed success for this Tiger team, and it was totally not a success. And I actually had done a critique that I had shared with this Disney guy who came in. I said, we claimed success, but we really didn't, and here's why. And he agreed with me. And that's when we agreed to go outside and hire somebody who knew how to do this. And yeah, you guys are consultants who know how to do this. you need people inside to say, hey, we need to go to these guys to have them help us do this.
So did IDEO solve that same, I don't want to come over the top here, but like, is it design thinking that solved that problem, or just IDEO's experience dealing with government, and I guess you could argue that is a type of design thinking.
I don't think you can separate it. You guys have mentioned culture, and you call it culture, call it mindset. It's just like, hey, give us a problem, and we're going to use our process, which involves talking to people, talking to the right people, coming up with analogous observations, not just willy-nilly, but we have some intention behind that. So like the story of they were designing an operating room, and one of their observations was, we got to go talk to a NASA pit crew or a NASCAR pit crew. Why are you doing that? We want to know what people do when they're under pressure, have time constraints, and it's an emergency and they got to deal with it, right? And so they learn very valuable things like, hey, we always have kits that are ready to respond to a certain situation. That's valuable learning for the operating room, right? And so it's a combination of the culture of sort of seeking this out and having the confidence that you're going to get there, right?
And that was something you credit to IDEO. That was IDEO's idea.
That was one of their ideas for that particular thing. I'm sorry, it was one of their ideas for that particular thing. I don't want to suggest that IDEO is the only design firm around that's capable of doing this. They were just the ones that I happen to deal with. I know there are others around that are local in the DC area who are also very good. But the thing that they had that we couldn't replicate internally was this culture, this mindset, the commitment to do it, right? You guys are familiar with a situation where you've learned something new and now you go through the motions, right? Okay, we can do this. We'll just throw some stickies on a board. We'll go talk to people and magic will happen. Well, the magic doesn't happen. You don't get to the pros without practice.
Yeah, I think that what I'm learning in this conversation that is more confirmative than not, because I spent time doing this, is that there are things that we know work. Stuff that Adam had been doing around the world, we know works. The IDEO folks, we know that works. There's a particular incentive to make sure those things work on their side, right? Because eventually it becomes down to, if you don't get it to work, John is not going to be taking his kids to Disney World, right? You talk about Disney World. I know John is a huge Disney World fan, so is his family. But those things don't necessarily translate. And we have experience, all three of us have experience about what happens when you don't have kind of those economic pressures, right? When you don't have to worry about second and third order customers that have as much impact on your primary customer to the thing that you have. And so part of the lesson I'm learning and relearning here is that culture, the culture of bureaucracy, the culture of government, the culture of making sure that we continue on doing what we've been building is important, is really important, because otherwise there are no other pressures. Because October 1st, everybody's going to get their next set of money. And when you do it well, one of the things we learned is that when you do your job well and you do it under budget, on time, or on spec, that they take money away from you. So the incentives are upside down.
How about it? Makes no sense.
None at all. Hey, Pete, I know that you. I noticed your call. We're coming up on the end of our hour. What lessons would you give out of your 37 years of work plus another 3 years? So you now have 40 years of this experience. If you had to say to a young person, I'm going to give him 5 years of experience, right? A young person going and somebody says, "Hey, come here, kid. You know how to do innovation. Why don't you come over here and come into my shop and do some innovation?" What would be the thing that you would say to them is like, "Okay, take it, but make sure you get these things, like you pay attention to these 5 or 6 things." What are those things that you would say, pay attention?
I think probably the biggest thing that sticks in my mind is to be able to create stuff, be able to show somebody. Don't just tell them a story, but be able to come up with some means of showing them something that will catch their
Yeah.
interest.
Or as I like to say, show, don't tell.
Yeah, basically that would be probably the one thing that I thought was the most powerful. It always seemed to make a difference when you had the ability to show somebody something as opposed to just try to narrate a good pitch. I mean, a good pitch is not a bad thing, but being able to show somebody something, I mean, you could just imagine a scenario. Hey, come look, I want to show you something. Or I put up the posters in the innovation center. I think, hey, sir, take a look at that.
I think
Very
that's
powerful
important.
stuff.
I love
We
it.
have a guy. We have a guy that we had on our show not too long ago. He said, "We know that Lean Startup is build, measure, learn." He's like, "Sell, build, learn." Can you sell it? Can you
Mm-hmm.
show people something? They're like, "I'll take two of those," and you go in your mind, there ain't nothing there, but they'll take two of them anyway.
So now I can build it. Yeah.
I
Yep.
saw some sense of some desirability.
Mhm.
Right. I like that.
Awesome.
Hey, John, you got us?
Let's do this thing. Pete, thank you very
Cool.
much for sharing your insights. Fantastic. I'm sure there's
It
a
was
thousand
fun.
more
Yeah,
stories
thanks
you
a
could
lot.
tell. Yeah. So we'll definitely have you back on some other time in the future. Ty, any final thoughts?
Pete, I wanted to say thank you because you and I literally, it was a cold call, cold response. I don't even know how but we bounced back and forth for a while. And I appreciate you bringing your 40 years of experience to this program. Um, uh, because it's with people like you that keep us going. And so the only thing I'm going to ask you to do is if you can think about it, cool. Um, if not, email me. Who else should we talk to? That's the only thing that I'm going to ask you. Who else should we talk to?
Well, I got a number of suggestions, so yeah, I'll send them along.
I love it.
All right, that sounds cool. I appreciate it.
Good
So,
interviewing.
thank you for
Fun.
coming.
Glad to meet you guys.
Yeah,
Yes,
likewise.
yes.
Adam, any final thoughts? You good?
I'll post some stuff in the yeah, I think there's something about my takeaway from the whole call is about this tangibility of putting something real. Like obviously we're coming at it from the other side, and I think there's a difference between solutioneering and not actually solving a problem versus solving a problem but doing it in a tangible way, iterating with real stuff. Obviously, I think I keep mentioning this, Teresa Torres, like now that things are, you can build anything now. I think, discovery and the scientific method is going to be more important. Some people are arguing that it's less important because you can build anything. But I do think that there's an interesting, even this guy, Rob, what's his name? Yeah, I think it's Rob Snyder, this guy from Harvard who's been talking a lot. I don't know if he's anti-customer discovery. He acknowledges it's important, but his big thing is sell, sell, sell. Maybe we'll get him on in the next couple of weeks and continue this piece of the conversation. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like you can still understand what problem you're solving and who you're solving it for. I still believe in just blind solutioneering is not healthy. But I want to keep pulling on that thread of like I see these big 4x8 posters. I want to get my hands on one of these things that you're talking about and
Nice.
maybe brought one out of the office or something. But yeah, that would be the thing that I want to pull on that thread with you, and maybe we'll have you and Rob on. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Well,
Let's
Ty,
see.
for your benefit, go Eagles.
That's right. Go Eagles.
That's it. Thank you. Thank
The
you.
Ravens are out. Let's see what happens. Let's see. Final thoughts here. Listener Quincy says, crazy that you have to design for the personalities in the room simultaneously with the product. Boy, isn't that design thinking in a nutshell right there? Because
Yeah,
it's not necessarily building the right thing. It's building the right thing for the right person. Unfortunately.
that's my man Q.
Mhm. So that's a good observation there. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. And it's always good to hear some of the wins, some of the pockets of excellence that happen when you're doing the mission space, and how you can use these tools. And I'm glad you said there's no one size fits all. That there has to be different tools for the job to get things done, and that's what it's all about, right? You want to find the right thing to maximize mission for the dollars that we get. So again, thank you very much, Pete, for coming on. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Take care.